All right. Oh, good. I'm mic'd. Okay, we're going to get this thing started. It's 12:30. Hopefully everyone's had time to grab some lunch. Thank you so much. Welcome to everyone who's online, and thank you all for joining us here in person today at this lovely lunch, where we are launching the 2025 annual Aging in Canada survey. It's one of our signature research initiatives, and it's so nice to, after a ton of work, to be gathered here today. I'm Mark Hazelden. I'm the Interim Executive Director of the National Institute on Aging, and it's actually really lovely that we have the permanent ED who's on mat leave, Alyssa Brierley, here with us today as well. It's so nice to see you, Alyssa. I'm going to begin with a land acknowledgement. The NIA and our hosts, Manulife, are located in Toronto, which is within the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and the Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. So I'd like to thank our hosts, Manulife, for not only lunch, but also for being the presenting sponsor of this year's survey. It means the world to us. Thank you. Manulife's support makes sure that this work is accessible to Canadians from coast to coast. And of course, we're also deeply grateful for the ongoing support over many, many years and continuing into the future of the Waltons Trust. Sandy is here. Their support has enabled us to build a policy team at the NIA and to launch this survey every year, among other things. The NIA, National Institute on Aging, for those of you who don't know, is an independent policy and research institute housed at Toronto Metropolitan University. We work with partners across the country to turn research into practical policy solutions that help Canadians age with confidence. And this year's launch of the survey is especially meaningful because we're heading into our 10th year of existence at the NIA. So we're celebrating 10 years this year, which makes it extra nice that Mitch Fraser, our founder, is here in the room today, and Dr. Samir Sinha, who are the co-founders of the NIA. And it's, to me, a wonderful testament that they're both still, Samir is our Director of Health Policy Research, and Mitch is our board chair, still 10 years on, deeply involved. It shows what a great organization this is, and it's typified by their commitment, so thank you. So over the past decade, we've worked to ensure that evidence and not assumptions guide how Canada responds to an aging population, and the Aging in Canada survey is central to that mission. Each year, we hear from 6,000 Canadians from coast to coast, age 50 and over, capturing lived experiences, how they're aging, what's working, and where systems are falling short. We know that industry partners like Manulife and policymakers use our data on income, geography, housing, social connections to help identify where policies, programs, and services are making a real difference and where we're missing the boat and gaps need to be filled. We know that senior serving organizations, our partners, use the survey data to validate what they see in their everyday work. It provides credible evidence, so all of you can use that data to advocate for resources, design programs, and demonstrate need, whether it's addressing loneliness, supporting caregivers, or improving access to care and income supports. So I'll close by thanking the amazing NIA team, and I'll have more to say on that a little bit later after the panel. But I also want to recognize a very, very special guest, our honorary chair, the Right Honourable Adrienne Clarkson, Canada's 26th Governor General. Thank you, Madam Clarkson. And Madam Clarkson is joined today by her daughter, Dr. Blaise Clarkson, so thank you for joining as well. And finally, I'd like to welcome the incredible Leslie Church, the MP for Toronto St. Paul's, just north of here. Leslie is the yes. Leslie is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Jobs and Families and Persons with Disabilities, and to the Secretaries of State for Labour, Children and Youth, and most importantly, to us here for seniors. Leslie will be delivering remarks in a few minutes on behalf of the Government of Canada. So thank you all for joining us today. I'm going to pass it to Naveed Irshad, the President and CEO of Manulife Canada, to bring remarks on behalf of Manulife. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Manulife's global headquarters here in Toronto, and thank you for joining us today for the launch of the NIA's Aging in Canada survey results. So at Manulife, we believe in helping people live longer, healthier, and more financially secure lives. It's the heart of what we do. This is why this work really matters to us. Canada is changing. People are living longer than ever before, but longevity actually brings new questions. How do we make those extra years healthy, meaningful? How do we make those extra years financially resilient? This survey helps us answer some of these questions. It gives us a clear picture of what aging looks like today, and to be frank, some of the findings are quite sobering. Behind the data and the numbers are real people, our parents, our neighbors, our friends. Health, wealth, and longevity are connected. If you're healthy, your savings last longer. If you're financially secure, you can stay active and engaged. It's actually all one system. That's why we launched the Longevity Institute, to help bridge the gap between lifespan, health span, and wealth span. We're supporting access to care and making prevention easier through partnerships with Cleveland Clinic Canada, TELUS Health, CAMH, Maven, Vitality, the list goes on. We're also investing in tools to help Canadians plan for longer retirements. Supporting this survey is part of bridging that gap. Together with the National Institute on Aging, we're advancing the conversation on health, wealth, and longevity. The Aging in Canada survey offers one of the most comprehensive annual snapshots of how Canadians aged 50 and older are experiencing aging today. Insights drive action, and aging well is about quality of life. So I want to thank Mark and the NIA for leading this important work. And I want to thank all of you for being part of this conversation. Longevity is only a gift if it comes with good health, financial security, and purpose. Now, thankfully, we're not alone in these efforts. In addition to the NIA's great work, our federal government is also dedicated to enhancing the lives and well-being of Canadians. We're pleased to welcome to the podium Leslie Church, member of the Parliament for Toronto St. Paul's, as Mark said, the federal riding just to the north of us here today. In addition to her roles in her duties as MP, she's also the Parliamentary Secretary to the Secretaries of State for Labor, for Seniors, and for Children and Youth, and to the Minister of Jobs and Families. Big role. So thank you, MP Church, for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Manulife for hosting this in such a beautiful space, to the Waltons Trust, to good friends and old friends throughout the audience, to Madam Clarkson for your ongoing leadership in this space, Dr. Sinha, Mitch Fraser. This is such an incredible, incredible room to be in, and I want to thank everyone for joining us today, here in person and online. It is really wonderful to actually see such strong engagement from across the country and speaks to how important these conversations about aging in Canada truly are. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Je suis très heureuse d'être parmi vous aujourd'hui pour le lancement du sondage 2025 sur le vieillissement au Canada. I'm very, very pleased to be here today on behalf of Secretary of State Stephanie McLean and to join you for the launch of the National Institute on Aging's 2025 Aging in Canada survey. I also want to thank the National Institute on Aging for this work. What you do matters. This survey doesn't just measure trends, it reflects real lives, real choices, and real pressures facing older Canadians. As the Member of Parliament for Toronto St. Paul's, I see this every day. In our community, older adults are deeply engaged. They're volunteering, caregiving, running businesses, holding families together. But at the same time, many of them are definitely experiencing the strain of rising costs, housing pressures, financial uncertainty, challenges associated with access to health care and home care. And certainly one of the things that you see going door to door is social isolation and its impact. And it's heartbreaking. This year's survey captures this reality clearly. While income adequacy has remained relatively stable, it's undoubtedly fragile. Only 38% of older Canadians say their income is good enough to save. Nearly 4 in 10 are getting by just enough to avoid major problems, and more than 1 in 5 report inadequate income. Les données montrent aussi que ces réalités ne sont pas vécues de façon égale. Les aînés en excellente ou très bonne santé sont beaucoup plus susceptibles de dire que leur revenu est suffisant comparativement à ceux dont la santé est mauvaise. Et les propriétaires sont beaucoup plus susceptibles de se sentir financièrement en sécurité que les locataires. Une réalité très visible à ma circonscription. Significant insecurity remains a concern. 1 in 5 older adults are living at or near poverty levels, and near 1 in 5 cannot afford an unexpected $500 expense. For many, the rise in cost of living is now their number one worry. This is about seniors, but it's also about families. It's about caregivers. It's about support systems. And this is very personal for me. My grandmother, who I've often talked about on the campaign trail, Wanda, she helped raise me. I would say she turned me into the liberal I am today. She cared for everyone on her street, through thick and through thin. And watching her age at home with strength and grace, but with the constant support of her daughter, my mother, as her caregiver. This shaped how I think about policy and why this work matters so much. And in fact, as I mentioned to a few friends in the room already, just in the past 24 hours, my family was one of the ones that got a dreaded phone call that's taking me to Victoria to visit my father, who, has been thrust all of a sudden into our healthcare system and our family squarely into the realities of aging. And it's why it's so important that this work is being done. And it's why it's so important that governments are working together to confront and address the realities of aging and making sure the right supports are in place. I think about a few of the things that are really core to what we've been working on right now. Older Canadians want their financial systems to be safe, appropriate, standing here in Manulife. We're responding by launching Canada's first federal strategy to fight fraud, financial crime, and economic abuse. We've made enhancement to pensions and to the OAS for our seniors. Recently, we've expanded our dental care program. I hear this from seniors in Toronto, St. Paul's. They've called it a lifeline to the type of care that they have been putting off for years. Over 6 million Canadians are registered right now in our dental care program. Millions of them are seniors. That is benefiting Canadians to the tune of about $800 in costs for dental care each year. We've recently made a commitment to strong public health care with an additional $5 billion investment in our recent budget towards health infrastructure and to urgent care. We've announced and are putting in place a Health Heroes tax credit for personal support workers because, as this room would know, it is their heart and souls that are going into helping many of our aging seniors to age with dignity. These are just a few of the things that we're working on right now. But the problems are system-wide, the challenges are there. And aging is inescapable. We all get there or have loved ones who are already there. So I really do, on behalf of the Government of Canada, thank you for your work. And thank you to the National Institute on Aging, to everyone who's joined us today for helping move this conversation forward. Or, as I like to think of it, making it older and wiser, like the Canadians that we serve now and into the future. So thank you for having me here. I wish you all the best in this announcement and release today. And I'd like to pass the mic back to Talia Bronstein, the Director of Policy here at the National Institute on Aging, who's going to present this year's survey results. Thank you very much.
Right, hello everyone. Thank you, MP Church, for sharing your personal story today, as well as the remarks from the government. I think we all have those personal stories of why this survey matters, why talking about our aging population matters. Now, I get the honor today of being the one to present what has been a year's worth of work for some incredibly dedicated, talented people. My co-authors, Zine Qureshi, Gabrielle Gallant, Mark Hazelden, Alyssa Brierly, and Samir Sinha. Thank you for your brain power, your insights, your perseverance. I also want to acknowledge Natalie Itziatzik, who helped kick off this year's survey process, as well as the NIA's incredible communications, operations, and partnership team members. None of this could be possible without you. We also have our external reviewers, many of whom are in the room or online, who really helped ensure that our survey was as high quality as it could be. So one piece of housekeeping. Today will be, slides aren't, there we go. Okay, good. One piece of housekeeping. So we will be using Slido today for audience questions during our panel discussion. You can scan that QR code there on the screen or go to slido.com and enter an NIA survey when prompted. No download necessary, no login necessary, but it's a great way to enter your questions. You can see what other people are asking. You can upvote. If that's a challenge, though, we do have note cards on your tables and pens. So if you want to write down a question, you can just wave your card in the air and a member of the NIA team will grab that from you. And we'll take those during the panel discussion. You can ask questions of the panel, or if you have questions about the survey, I can hop back up. Okay, on to the main event. So this year, Canada is going to become a super aged nation. That means that 1 in 5 Canadians are going to be 65 and older. But experiences of aging start long before someone turns this magical number of 65. When we look at Canadians aged 50 and older, that's 38% of our population, or 15.7 million people that can be considered part of our aging population. And these individuals are diverse. Their experiences are driven by their socioeconomic status, their social connections, their personal histories. And the reason why we're becoming a super aged nation is in part because of demographics. Shifting demographics, people having fewer children, but also Canadians are living longer. And that's something that we should celebrate. I know I'm certainly happy that that's my future prospect, but it's also something that we need to plan for because it does lead to distinct opportunities and challenges. And this is one of my favorite quotes from the report. I think this is why every single one of us is here today. The choices we make and the actions we take now will determine whether Canada's longevity dividend will translate into added years of health, independence, and active participation in society, or whether rising inequality, gaps in care, and social isolation will become defining features later in life. As has been mentioned, the NIA's Aging in Canada survey is one of our landmark programs at the NIA. It's part of a decade-long initiative, and we're really looking at perspectives on aging. How do older adults view their lives today? Now, there's other sources of data out there about older adults, but what sets ours apart is that it's timely. So the time between publication and time between data collection and publication is quite short. We do it annually. It's comprehensive. We're looking at 10 indicators of aging well, and we're able to track those trends. And it's representative. We're able to pull forth those diverse experiences of older adults. It's practical, it's useful for policy development, and as a result, this has become one of Canada's most important ongoing tools for understanding the realities of aging. So this is just a snapshot of our indicators. We'll get into more details as we explore, but as you can see, we cover a lot of ground. We look at social well-being, financial security, health and independence, and overall perspectives on aging. This year's survey was conducted with Abacus Data. We're going to hear more from the founder and CEO, David Coletto, on our panel. We're really grateful for their support and guidance in this process. We surveyed 6,001 individuals this year across all provinces and, for the first time, the territories as well. We include those 50 plus to capture that transition into aging. We use a quota-based sampling to reflect diversity, and then we wait to the 2021 census. And the survey was conducted in June and July of this year. And this is their 4th year of doing this survey. Now, in terms of the key findings, optimism about aging is strong, but has declined. The risk of social isolation and loneliness remains stubbornly high. Retirement feels increasingly out of reach for many, but a good news story that we're seeing perceptions of access to primary care and dental care affordability have improved. So we're going to get into these in more detail. Our first section is around social well-being. So one of our indicators is around social isolation. Now this is a measure that looks at the number of connections an individual has with friends, family, the broader community. We found that 43% are at high risk of social isolation. We also measure loneliness, which is a subjective feeling of being disconnected regardless of the number of connections you have. And over half, 57%, were at somewhat or very lonely. And this is really concerning because we haven't seen any progress on either of these indicators in all 4 years of this survey. When we look at the subgroups, those with low income and poor health were the ones most likely to have high levels of social isolation and loneliness. We combine these into what we call the index of social strength, and we find that more older Canadians have weak social networks than strong ones. And this has also been relatively unchanged. And interestingly, it's the younger cohort of the older adults, the 50 to 64-year-olds, who were most likely to have the weakest social networks, showing that employment doesn't necessarily equate into strong social connections. Now this might relate to what we're seeing here, which is around social participation. This year we found that 1 in 3 participated in social, recreational, or group activities more than once a week, but that's down from 39% in 2024. When we asked people about the barriers, the biggest one was affordability, and that was particularly true for that younger cohort of the 50 to 64-year-olds, as well as other responsibilities. That might be things like working or caregiving, whereas for those who are 80 plus, health conditions were their biggest barriers to social engagement. Our next indicator is a really interesting one. It's about ageism, and we measure this in a very novel way. First, we ask people point blank, have you ever been discriminated based on age? And very few say yes, only 12%. But then we start asking about very specific experiences, and all of a sudden a very different picture appears. So as you can see here, these are experiences of what we call everyday ageism. Things like hearing jokes about aging, people suggesting older adults are undesirable or unattractive, people assuming you can't use technology. And once we start asking those specific questions, all of a sudden 70% say that they have experienced one of these forms of everyday ageism. And when we look at this 3+ category, people who have experienced 3 or more of these in the past year, that's been steadily rising year over year. And those who are 80+, those in poor health, and those with inadequate income were the most likely to report experiencing ageism. So that's something that's really concerning. Let's switch gears a little bit into financial security. So in terms of income adequacy, we ask people to self-rate their income, recognizing that 2 people with the same income might have very different levels of adequacy. If one rents, one owns, one has health conditions, one doesn't. And what we've seen is our lowest income category has been remarkably stable over 4 years. We've seen a slight decline in that second lowest category, income not enough and having a hard time, and some increases in the higher income categories. But despite these minor shifts, 22% say that their income is not enough. They have inadequate income. That's 1 in 5 older Canadians. And when we look by subgroups, the findings are really stark here. Homeowners and those in good health were far more likely to have adequate income compared to those in poor health and those who are renting. We also asked people about their financial concerns, and cost of living definitely rose to the top. I think that's probably true for most Canadians. And then it might relate to that second concern as well, running out of money. When older adults are relying on fixed incomes, that can become a particular concern, recognizing people are thinking about how long are my retirement savings going to last. Now this indicator, I think, is my favorite, which I maybe shouldn't say in front of the other indicators, but it's something that's quite unique to the NIA survey. So this is called the Material Deprivation Index. I won't get into a ton of detail here, but I'm happy to answer questions afterwards. But basically, Canada has a poverty measure, an official poverty line. It's called the market basket measure. It tallies up all the costs of a basic standard of living in different regions in Canada, and if your income is above that bar, then you're not in poverty. Material deprivation, on the other hand, is an outcome-based measure. It looks at whether people can actually afford a reasonable standard of living. So let's consider 2 people with an income of $25,000. One is a homeowner and in good health. One has a lot of out-of-pocket health expenses, is a renter, has special dietary needs, is paying off debt. These living conditions are going to vary vastly, and that's what material deprivation is aiming to measure. This is a common metric used in Europe, and there's some incredible researchers at the University of Ottawa, as well as anti-poverty groups who are working to get this adopted as a complementary measure. So when we use the Material Deprivation Index, what we find is that 1 in 5 Canadians 50 and older are experiencing a poverty level standard of living, and that's considerably higher than what the official poverty line would tell us. So it tells us that this MDI measure can really be helpful in tandem with those income-based measures to tell the full story of who's experiencing poverty. When we look by subgroups, those most likely to be experiencing poverty are those with poor health, women, renters, those with lower levels of education, and those 50 to 64, which tells us that income supports like old age security and the guaranteed income supplement are effective at lowering that poverty experience for older Canadians. The most common item people could not afford was an unexpected expense of $500. But there was a good news story here for those with good eyesight who can see buried in this graph here. We've seen a 5-point drop in the number of people who said that they were unable to afford dental care. Now this is exciting because this is coming on the heels of the full implementation of the Canadian Dental Care Plan in Canada, which provides dental coverage for those who have an income below a certain threshold and don't have insurance. So this is a promising finding that public policy works. This program may already be achieving a reduction in barriers to dental care, so it's something we'll keep an eye on for future trends. Our final indicator in our financial security section is about retirement readiness. This one shows a concerning trend where this year, among those who have not yet retired, only 29% said that they could afford to retire at their desired time, and that's down from 34% the year prior. Now this may in part be explained by the fact that we found 1 in 5 have saved less than $5,000 for retirement, excluding property. And when we combine that with the next category, under $100,000, we're looking at about half of older adults. Now, when we think about the fact that older adults are living longer, and some might have a 30, 35, 40-year retirement, that will be incredibly difficult to manage on $100,000 or less in savings and can force a more reliance on our public income support systems. Moving into health and independence, our next indicator is a good news story. So we measure access to healthcare, and we've seen this year an improvement in those who say they have a primary care provider. Now, we're not going to celebrate fully because we're still only at 68% of the population, which is lower than it should be. And for those primary care experts in the room today, I'm sure there are many, that is lower than other estimates of primary care coverage in Canada, and that's likely due to how our question is phrased. We ask about whether someone has a primary care provider who they see on an ongoing basis for general health needs. So we're measuring not just being rostered, but actually seeing a primary care provider. Another good news story here, we've seen an increase in the percent who said they could get broader health care services beyond primary care. But again, we're still only at 70% here. So we're still falling short of that 100%. In terms of the barriers, the biggest ones were not being able to get appointments, challenges getting referrals, and appointments getting canceled, delayed, or rescheduled. Our next indicator is about home and community care. So we define home care as healthcare services provided by trained professionals or non-medical support services to assist with one's personal care needs, and community support services as other types of support, help people stay active, engaged, independent in their communities. So that would be non-medical services, such as meal delivery, transportation, home maintenance, recreation, adult day programs, etc. We found for both of these, it's quite consistent that about 1 in 5 were not able to access the home and community care services that they needed. And the biggest barriers, again, were the same across both, with wait times, cost, and difficulty qualifying as the biggest barriers. Now this becomes particularly acute when we talk about our next indicator, which is aging in the right place. Now, we say right place to mean the most appropriate setting based on an older person's preferences, circumstances, and care needs. And when we ask participants, where do you want to age? The vast majority, 81%, say they want to age in their home or a smaller home. Only a tiny percent, 3%, say they want to move to a long-term care home as they age. This year, we went further by asking, okay, well, is your home suitable for aging? And only 49% said that it was fully suitable. 62% hadn't taken any steps to prepare their home for aging in place. So when we look at that previous indicator, the lack of access to home and community care, coupled with the fact that most people are living in homes that are not suitable for aging and they've taken no steps to do so, we see a disconnect between people's aspirations and the reality that a lot of these individuals are going to end up on our current trajectory needing to go into long-term care despite that not being their preference. And that shows us that if we want to really enable aging in place, we've got a lot of work to do to be able to realize that aspiration for older adults. Our final section focuses on perceptions of aging. We ask older adults, how do you feel about the prospect of getting older? And this year we saw the sharpest year-over-year drop in positive feelings towards aging. As you can see here on the slide, it's been very consistent for the past 3 years, and then all of a sudden there's this drop. Now, I don't have a perfect answer for why this might be. I think there's a lot of factors that contribute to it. One is that the survey was conducted in June and July 2025, a time of a lot of political, economic unrest, uncertainty that can contribute to people's feelings of optimism. But at the same time, there's a lot of other barriers that people have expressed through this survey that might be compounding on how they feel about their aging. Things like access to home and community care, being able to afford retirement, feelings of social isolation, exposure to ageism, all of these things are going to impact how people perceive the future of aging and their own experiences. So it's something we'll need to explore further in coming years. Now, if anyone's thinking about relocating for your aging years, those in Quebec, Nova Scotia, and Saskatchewan had the most positive feelings towards aging, so you might have an optimistic future there. Those in Manitoba and New Brunswick had the least positive feelings, but there's still time to turn that around if some optimistic people go that way. So I think that's driven by a lot of kind of the material circumstances in those provinces, also probably some cultural norms that are playing into it, but just sort of an interesting to take note of. This year, for the first time, we also asked respondents, how do you think society views older adults? And nearly half say they felt that older adults are sometimes overlooked or dismissed. And that's exactly why we do this survey, to surface the perspectives of older adults, to value those voices, to make sure that they are not overlooked and dismissed. This is a huge proportion of our population that really should have that voice listened to, respected, heard, and valued. So in terms of what this survey tells us this year, longevity should be celebrated, but it also needs to be planned for. There's a disconnect between the aspirations of older adults to age well and the systems and structures available to support them. Aging experiences vary widely. There's a lot of diversity, particularly with respect to income and health as the biggest mediators here. This is not a monolithic group, and we can't plan or treat older adults as if it is a monolithic group. Policy and system choices shape how people age, for better or worse. And aging well is possible with the right investment. So we see that this year, for example, with the dental care plan program. When we make investments that are going to support older adults, we actually see outcomes improve. So where do we go from here? First and foremost, we need to continue to prioritize those voices of older adults in shaping policies, programs, and services that cuts across government, industry, community programs. We need to ensure those perspectives are reflective of the diversity of older adults and focus on addressing top priorities, including addressing social isolation, financial security, health, and independence. So I've just scratched the surface today. You can read our full report at the website up here, and in there you will find a lot more breakdown by subgroups. I know that's a lot of interest to people. And so while I just give a little housekeeping reminder, I'll invite the panel up because we're going to move there next. This is the QR code that you can use for our Q&A today with our panelists. So as a reminder, you can just scan the QR code, visit the link there. And if that is a challenge, there are those note cards on your table. Just raise it in the air and one of our team will grab it. So thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate your insight, your interest, and your interest in this survey. And I'm very excited to turn it over to our panel. Thank you.
On now. Great, perfect. Thank you so much, Talia. That was amazing and a ton of information to get through really fast. So encourage everyone to go absorb it at home when you have a chance. But the idea behind this panel is that we're going to start. We're going to tease out a little bit more, breathe some life into those survey data with three incredible people who have very different backgrounds, but I think we'll have some really neat insights into what we just heard. So. For those who joined online maybe late, I'm Mark Hazelden, the Interim Executive Director of the National Institute on Aging, and it's my enormous pleasure to introduce my panelists. So Satya Brink is joining us today from Ottawa. She has 30 years plus of experience as a social policy researcher in academia. Her experience spans the Government of Canada, international organizations like the OECD, the World Bank, UNESCO Institute on Lifelong Learning, and also she's an associate with our friends at the International Longevity Centre Canada. And Satya and I met this past September at the International Federation on Aging conference in Cape Town, and I was totally blown away by what Satya brings, her perspective to this questions on aging and questions particularly on longevity and how it is a huge, huge benefit to society. So thank you, Satya. David Coletto maybe needs no introduction. He's the CEO, founder, and chair of Abacus Data. He was named one of the 100 most influential people in politics by the Hill Times. David is one of Canada's most recognizable pollsters and commentators on politics, consumer behavior, and the workplace. And he's our partner. Abacus delivered our survey last year and will again next year. So thank you so much for joining, David. Karen McDonald is all the way here from Edmonton today. Karen wears many hats. She is the chair of the Community Leadership Council, executive director of Sage Seniors Association, and also part-time as the provincial director of Healthy Aging Alberta, where she works with community-based senior serving organizations across the province to meet the needs and build on the strengths of seniors living in community. Such a pleasure to have you here, Karen. Thank you all. And just to get things, before we get things started with this panel, I'll just note, please keep your questions coming in online on Slido. If you're shy and you don't have a question yourself, you can just vote up other questions, so worth logging in just for that. We'll start taking audience questions almost as soon as they start coming in, so please send them. All right, what struck you? You just heard Talia's presentation. You've had mere minutes to soak in this data. What jumped out at you regarding the survey? Who wants to go first? Satya?
Sure. There were surprising things for the group that was the oldest. They were less lonely, according to your data. They also had their health care provided more than the others. In fact, I found 6 different places where the older groups did better. So I'm sort of wondering why the younger groups didn't do so well. And I found that was a bit surprising. And I was also surprised, maybe David has the answer to this, but I really thought that there would be a difference between genders because the men die before the women. And for some reason, when you look at it from 50 to 80, it's actually different for the older groups than the younger groups. And so I wondered, what the magic trick was there. But anyway, I think there are negative factors, but there are some positive gems, I think, that we should keep in mind and work on.
Definitely. Well, we want to tease out those positive gems as part of this discussion for sure. Karen?
Sure, I can jump in. I think what struck me was there's usually, I think every year, that stat that talks about the number of older adults who want to age in their existing home, right? We want to age in place, that's the dream. I think this year was 81% of people reported they want to stay in their existing home. But there was a second line there that talked about the number of people who have prepared to stay in their existing home. So do they have a plan to renovate or modify their existing home? And I think 62% of people said they had no plans to modify their existing home. And as a caregiver, I can relate to that. But what struck me about that was not only are individuals ill-prepared to age in place and what that means for us who have a commitment to helping people to age in place as policymakers or as folks delivering services in community, but the parallels from those 2 statistics to our systems. So our systems, I think universally in Canada, hope to support older adults to age in place. But I would suggest that 62% of folks who are ill-prepared to stay in their homes, I would suggest that 62% would parallel our level of readiness in our systems. So I was just reflecting a bit on that and how maybe that will inform our conversation with our panel today.
That's great, David.
Yeah, I think for me the big takeaway is as someone who gets to ask all adults questions all the time and trying to explore and understand the context of some of the results that we saw this year, particularly like the decline in positivity towards aging, the feelings that I'm not quite prepared for it, particularly among that 50 to 60-year-old group that's sort of entering that stage in life where they're trying to understand what's going on. I think the big takeaway is we all are living through this moment of deep uncertainty. As Talia said, like when this survey was done last year is no different than almost how we feel today, because it's like one crisis after another. That I do think that as uncertainty around the future rises, so too will questions on, am I prepared for it? And I think that is something that this survey, because it's being done every year, really can put a focus on, right? We don't always dig into the context within the questions, but the context hangs over everything. And I think that is what's going to be fascinating as a social scientist, is that, yeah, living in this world isn't that fun, we can all admit that, but as someone understanding how we're all trying to navigate it, I think this survey starts to give a sense of the complexity of aging at a time, as anyone, whatever stage of life you might be in, but aging in particular at a time when you maybe thought you had things set, and now you're questioning everything, and you have less runway to make adjustments, and I think that creates that anxiety around that.
Just to jump off that, is the kind of that slipping in positivity, is that particular to older Canadians in Canada, or is that something you see across demographics?
No, I mean that is a general sense. I mean, I have this stat that we ask every 2 weeks. Do you think the world's headed in the right direction? 10% think it is,
Oh my God.
and that's the lowest it's been since we've asked it. I always wonder, who are these 10%? There's a number of doctors in the room, like, can you prescribe me what they have? But look, yeah, I think the general mood of the country, of the world is, yeah, it's a much more difficult space. I think what comes with age, I'll say as somebody who is not at that stage yet, is experience. Right? And so when I look at the difference between, the resilience of older adults versus younger adults, it is the idea that I've been through a moment like this before. Living through the 60s and 70s feels like a lot like today. So I think there are definite upsides to being older, in the sense that you can have perspective on, maybe it'll be okay.
Yeah, I mean, so that's Satya, I'd be interested in your thoughts on that kind of that wealth of knowledge, that transference from the older generation to younger generations as one of the key benefits that often doesn't show up in the data of aging. Shocking in the Talia's presentation there, some of the stats around ageism, where 22% of older Canadians polled in this survey say that their perceptions that people assume they don't have anything of value to give. And here's David just mentioning, one of those huge intangible values. So, Satya, if you can talk about the preponderance of ageism that we saw in this survey, and how we can really turn that around and see aging as the benefit that it should be to society.
Can I be rude and first answer Karen first?
Just all the panelists answer each other whenever you want. Go, please.
I don't think you should think that older people should be planning about renovating their houses. Why don't we do what some of the other countries do and simply say, you cannot build any new housing without a full bathroom and a room that can be used as a bedroom, whether it's a den or whether it's some other space, a study or something like that. And that allows people to stay in their homes, and it's built in. And instead, we are building all these strange mansions, and you can't get upstairs to your bedrooms. I mean, that's not the way to do the things. And the other thing I wanted to mention about nursing homes is that for more than 20 years, Denmark has not built nursing homes. And it just drives me mad when people say, we need 30,000 beds. Beds is not the thing to think about. Denmark said, if you have rights as a person, you don't live in a bed. You live in a home. You need to have an address. That address is not a bed. It's some simple facility that is like a home. And I don't know what the building industry is thinking about. Over 40% of people are single person households. What are we building for these people? And now the US has sort of woken up, and the universities are building retirement communities. Why? Because these communities, they can house students, married students, because they're small, and they can also house older people. And these older people are studying at the university, and they're mentoring at the university. And there's much more interaction between generations. I mean, now there's a competition for these older people. And because they have something, this is where I'm coming back to what you said. They have something to give. Because, I mean, the interesting thing, I hope I'm doing this right. I did bring this up, but anyway. If you look at the oldest group, now I looked at the appendix a lot more carefully than most people might have. But if you look at that group, over 50% of the oldest group either has university education or some years of university. What? We're not going to use these people? And the ILO and the OECD, they say that most countries are not using their potentially skilled people. There's a new book out, The Future of Work is Gray. Why? Because there is this group that has work skills, they have knowledge, and we just let them be.
Maybe that's a perfect segue into some questions about work. 27% of respondents say they never plan to retire in the survey. The feeling of retirement readiness, as Talia just pointed out, slipped from 34% to 29%. So 62% of people said they're still working in that 50 to 65-year-old age group right now. That's actually up from where it was 4 years ago in the survey, at about 58%. So more respondents are working. The desire to never retire is going up, and yet workplaces are accommodating, or they're not accommodating, accepting this wisdom, the different needs of older workers. Thinking about the workplace and also combating ageism. Any thoughts, David?
Go ahead.
Well, I was thinking just as we were having this conversation around, because I think all the time about how fast the world of work is going to change and is changing as AI gets adopted, right? And I do a lot of work on the other side of the life cycle and thinking about education and what does education mean. And what everyone's telling us is that all going to be about soft skills, human skills, relationship building. And so I do think, even as a business owner, I'm now for the first time in 15 years asking myself, are we making a mistake by not purposely and intentionally creating space for older, more experienced workers who maybe not wanting to work full time, maybe want to balance sort of the golden years with, but actually can contribute to the success of my business and my team. And I do think that as we see the sort of entry-level positions get kind of erased by AI, that actually means more than ever to that group that are going to be coming into the workforce. So I'm starting to think about it, but I think very quickly we're going to have two things happen. We're going to have this massive group of experienced, knowledgeable, healthy, older Canadians, and a lot of space for them to contribute in a lot of different ways. So I think there is something there, and I think there's a public policy kind of incentive maybe to encourage that to happen that might actually make Canada more resilient to the kinds of changes that are happening. It's how do you take the fact that every time when Talia started the presentation, and it was right at the beginning of the report, is like, we are an aging, super aging nation. Like, that is a scary number. How do we take that and flip it and make it an advantage is the fundamental question I think this survey reminds us to think about all the time.
Okay, Karen, why don't you
Yeah, maybe just
jump
to
off
round
that.
that out. So community-based senior serving organizations, in addition to addressing things like social connectedness, also often are providing social services to low-income seniors. And so we work with a lot of low-income seniors who are working because they have to, not because they want to share their knowledge and expertise. And so there's some recommendations in the survey and the report around policy recommendations to allow low-income seniors to continue to work because they have to, right? The cost of living issues are really top of mind for the seniors that we're working with. Our social workers are trying to ensure that they can access housing and that they can optimize those, maybe 10 years there where they are really having a tough time, particularly if they're single. And so just to flag that as a key concern. The other thing to mention is there's unintended consequences within systems if we have older folks continuing to work. So we're seeing a decline in the rate of volunteerism. Seniors are also the largest percentage of caregivers, unpaid caregivers, so the implications around things like childcare and caregiving. So the pressures that we're seeing around things like social isolation and people's overall well-being, a lot of those folks are still working and they're trying to balance their own well-being and caregiving and financial pressures. So just to flag that it's great if we're working because we want to contribute, because we have something to contribute, and that leads to a lot of good outcomes around people feeling a sense of purpose. But there's a lot of people that are working for other reasons, and there's a lot of unintended consequences of that. So.
And work isn't certainly the only way to find purpose. And
Yes.
Karen, to your point, Talia just had it in her presentation, the most socially isolated group were those 50 to
Yes.
65. So the ones also most likely to be working. So you're
Yes.
spot on. Maybe just to tease out the social isolation theme a bit, because it's such a major finding again that number is just so stubborn that we're not addressing social isolation and loneliness. How do the community-based senior serving organizations that you work with, how do they have a role in meeting that challenge?
Yeah, I think that we exist within some of the trends that we're seeing in the report that we see that are very sticky issues around issues like changes in family demographics. So our families are more geographically dispersed. We have smaller families, so we're more likely to be living alone. Satya mentioned that. We see our infrastructure within our cities make it more difficult for people to get out. So whether that's transportation or even things like, I'm from Alberta, snow removal is top of mind all the time. Affordability, it comes up in the report as a key issue, right? So as a community-based senior serving organization, we're always looking at creative ways of making our programs more affordable. At our organization, we've moved to having all of our recreation programs delivered by volunteers so that we can offer those services at no cost. And sometimes the issue around affordability isn't even necessarily that the person can't actually afford it, it's that they perceive they can't afford it. So when we were talking earlier, it's all over the news that there's issues around affordability and issues with tariffs. People watch a lot of news when they're socially isolated. So if you perceive that you can't afford things, even if you can, you just don't come out. And so if we can make those services available at no cost through the use of volunteers, it's a great way of trying to get people involved. We're seeing an increase in the complexity around people's physical and mental health as a trend. So obviously people are more likely to stay home if they're not well. And then just, Satya, you mentioned it, a shift towards more individualistic social constructs. So if people are not engaging with their neighbors, if the way that we engage with intergenerational supports has changed fundamentally in our communities. So the role of the community-based senior services sector is twofold. We have formal programs, so imagine a senior center where people can come out and get involved in formal programs. But one piece that's often missed is the role of asset-based community development. So community-based senior serving organizations, they get involved in their community to look at what are the strengths of that community and how can they support that community to knit together the social fabric so that we have natural supports. So how do neighbors help neighbors? How do people volunteer to pick up their neighbor, to take them to the grocery store, to get to know each other? So if that senior has surgery, somebody shows up at their door with a meal. It's not a paid service. It's not something we can formally deliver as an organization, but these are the ways that we knit together that social fabric. And sometimes that requires a little bit of investment, maybe a community developer coming out to help people get to know each other. But I think that's going to be the future of how we address social connectedness and social isolation. And the community-based senior services sector is in the process of formalizing right across Canada right now, across provinces and territories, so that we can be part of the continuum of supports from informal supports all the way through to continuing care and facility-based care in a more formal way to address things like social isolation. And I think that's going to be the future of how we address those services in a more systemic way. And really, I think, leveraging best practices and data as part of that.
Well, it's great to hear that there's that sharing of best practices from coast to coast in a huge country. No wonder people are feeling isolated in communities that maybe aren't even connected to each other. So thanks, Karen, for the work you. Satya, are there international models where is Canada kind of standing alone in some of these isolation metrics, lack of connectivity, loneliness? As you've traveled the world, are other countries doing things better than us? Is there stuff that we can learn?
Yes. Just a short answer.
Great. Anything jump out, or I can switch while you think.
Well, I'd like to talk about loneliness. So there are 3 ways that countries are doing different things. First, it is the understanding of what loneliness is. Yes, it's subjective, but it is a very rational thing that human beings do. The greatest fear for people who are lonely is that there's nobody who cares for them, not caring, but cares for them. One day they're going to fall, they're going to lie on the floor, and nobody's going to find them for 2 days. This is a very rational thing. You don't do this with government programs, with counseling. You have a whole of government program for helping older people, and then you have to have all these community things that Karen was talking about. And you need to have a way in which neighbors and people are taking care of each other. And you cannot think about loneliness as though it is some kind of a problem that this person created. It's a mental health thing. It is a very rational human way of preparing themselves of what could go wrong. And I think that the way in which we respond to this has to be, right for that particular problem. And I think that we missed the boat with that. With the other points is that the reasons are different in other countries. So for example, in Asia, it's very dense. There are a lot of people around you. Families are tighter. But the main reason for isolation is loss of hearing. And in the Western, we have ways to respond to hearing, but we are lousy at other things. And also, I think that the way we respond in terms of policies is that we sort of think that it has to be various governments or different levels of governments that respond to this. No, I think it's aging is a thing that we all do. And if we are all doing it, then we must deal with aging for all. And we have to do that through communities, but also through governments.
David, do you have anything to jump in there? Or otherwise, we'll go to an audience question. Because
Go for the question.
well, that second one there. So questions are coming in on Slido. That's great. Just jumping off of what you just said, Satya. Alyssa Klingbaum asks, what do you see as the role and impact of the public and community versus the private sector in aging? And it sounded like you were kind of getting at that a little bit in your answer, Satya. So I don't know if anyone wants to jump in on that.
You want to know?
Is it all the government's responsibility? Is it all community? Is it all individual?
Yeah, I think all 3. We're seeing in Alberta, we've been very fortunate that our provincial government has started to see the value of community-based organizations and the role that they play as part of the continuum of continuing care. So we have a new continuing care framework where non-medical supports are now formally part of our continuing care system. And so within that, the reality is that nonprofit organizations cannot be all things to all people, right? We need to partner with for-profit organizations, and government obviously plays an essential role that can't be replaced by either. The question, though, is how do we balance the role of all three with clarity? And so one of the things we're working on right now is frameworks where we have clarity around the role, for example, around navigating into for-profit services, so that older adults have access to those services, but they have been screened in a way that we're confident that people are receiving a high quality service. We are ensuring, hopefully, that people are being protected around issues around fraud. For the nonprofit sector and the community-based senior services sector, creating a more systematized approach to service delivery around these non-medical supports. So if the vast majority of older adults in Alberta, it's over 90% of seniors live in their own homes, whether that's an apartment or a condo or a house. They don't live in congregate living. So all those services you otherwise would receive in congregate living, so your meals, supports around social connectedness, transportation, homemaking, laundry, all the things that you need to be able to age in place must be delivered in your home. You need a systemic approach to delivering those services. So we now have a backbone organization providing some coordination, evaluation, data collection, workforce planning in collaboration with the provincial government so that those services are now part of our continuing care system. And the private sector has to be part of that because the nonprofit sector cannot deliver the bulk of those services, right? So I think that the trick is to be able to have clarity around roles, and then the last piece that's missing in community, at least, is we don't currently have a framework around accountability for quality. Quality assurance in community-based supports doesn't yet exist in the way it does in facility-based care. And so that's the next step for our sector, is to be able to provide some standards in terms of the quality of service and how those are delivered.
When I think of, I'm going to take it a slightly different direction and think of, okay, what's the private sector role? The role in what, I think, is the question. But I look at this sometimes from a market research lens, and I'm fascinated by older adults as a consumer group because there hasn't been a group in the history of the country, or maybe in the Western world, that has as many people in it who have as much wealth, an aggregate, that baby boomers, for example, have. And so, I always say to my clients, there's two things that are super valuable from any private sector business. People who have lots of time and people who have lots of money. And, older adults are increasingly having both of those things. And so I do think, whether we're talking about social isolation, whether we're talking about, finding purpose, whether it's giving back, whether it's doing something, this is a very powerful consumer group that I think, frankly, not enough businesses think about, because too often we default to let's go all after Gen Z. We got to figure out how to get that youngest cohort, when in fact, baby boomers represent an incredibly, I think, I'm going to use the term lucrative. I'm not saying take advantage of them. I'm saying they have a lot of life left to live, and they have an immense amount of wealth as a whole. Not everybody fits that point. The other thing, I spend a lot of time thinking about politics too, and I'm also well aware that this is also an incredibly powerful political group. And so I think there is plenty of reason for both public and private to care a lot about these groups, and I suspect they're going to play both big roles in determining their well-being.
Want to jump in on that?
Sure. One of the mistakes we make, I'm glad you said roles. You should say that again. Because we think when you say public and private and nonprofit, they should all do the same thing, only less depending on where you are and what. No, I think you should slice and dice and do it in different ways. So for example, and I think there are a couple here in Canada that do this too. In France, the big grocery chains are not allowed to throw food away. They have to give it to the organizations, whether public or nonprofit, that can distribute the food to the people who need it. And that is not even like a group-to-group decision. It's a decision where they do it and it becomes available as a resource for these organizations to take and use and run with. I mean, that's the way we need to see. What can each group do best? And how can we then use that material by other organizations to deliver what we need to other groups?
It's so much we can learn internationally. And someone just, you were all sort of, we started off a little bit talking about social isolation and connectedness before we got to that question. And one of the antidotes to isolation is participating, socializing, doing things. And our survey shows a dip in the number of people who say they're active every week, or at least weekly, from 39% last year to 33% this year. Are reporting being active at least once a week. Couple that with the desire to do something, those types of activities, and it's only about 50% of respondents actually are doing as much as, or achieving activity as much as they desire to. So we ask them barriers, and the barriers are always often cost and availability, someone to do these activities with, health. Is it always cost? These are some of the in part some of the poorest in society and some of the richest in society. How do we get around even the perception of what the barriers are to get those participation numbers up?
If I could start with one, that didn't really surface in this survey, but we see it in other work that we do, is the rising perception of just it being unsafe out there. Right? And I'll give you just a very personal story. My parents are in their 70s. They live just north of here in Richmond Hill. I grew up there. And I was visiting last fall. I'm there more than once a quarter, I promise. But I was there last fall because I remember this story so innately. And we're having dinner, just the three of us. And my parents are still very healthy, thankfully. My dad golfs every day, strong. My mom's stronger than him. And the doorbell rings. Now, they live in Richmond Hill, very privileged neighborhood, safe place. The doorbell rings, and I'm like, oh, okay, let me go check it for you. And they're like, no, we don't answer the door. And I said, and I grew up in this house, and I'm like, what do you mean you don't answer the door? And they say, like, it's unsafe. Somebody's gonna come in, bash it down, take stuff from us. And so when you talk about perceptions that are barriers for people to participate, we underestimate sometimes those things they hear a lot about and imagine the very worst, right? And so these are folks who, by all accounts, still have their health, should not be afraid of that. I would be fearful to get in a fight with my father even today, and yet his perception even is, I'm not going to open that door. I'm not going to even consider opening the door. So if you're not willing to open the door in your own home to somebody, how are you going to leave it? I think becomes a really big question. And so we have to counter that fear by continuing to actually remind people we live in generally safe places, some people more safe than others, to make them feel confident to leave and to then participate, I think is such an important lesson in that own story for me.
We make it very difficult for people to participate of any age. You have to travel to great distance, and you have to buy a registration, and you have to do this, and you have to do that. That's not necessarily the way to make participation attractive to people. I like the model that some of the Asian countries are doing, Taiwan, Singapore particularly, the Sao Foundation in Singapore. Anybody here from Singapore? No? Okay. Well, what they do is they have Singapore is very dense, but they have a huge center for each locality. This center is modeled on how we built daycare and kindergartens for children. So all the older people in that community are 500 meters from this thing. 500 meters. Most people can walk that distance. And in addition, the walking distance, they have benches on the way. So you can even sit down and then walk and get to this place. This building it has doctor's offices and where the doctor comes and the psychiatrist comes and everything. It has a place where you can play table tennis or bridge or mahjong is the big one. You can eat there, and the food is prepared by the people who come there. And you can watch movies there. You can help children do their homework there. I mean, it's a lively community center which doesn't say, look, this is good for you. Go and join that club and, go skating with everybody. That's not the way it works. It's a way in which you think of this as a normal routine of something that you're doing. You potter around in the morning, you do something, and then you say, oh, I'll go to the center and check it out and see what I can. I mean, also they have lovely courses there. I was amazed by some of the things that they were being taught. I mean, we need to think about the way in which we organize ourselves when we talk about social participation. I mean, if social participation is onerous, nobody's going to do it. I mean, and that's one of the reasons I wish doctors would do more nature prescription. Samir, I think maybe you support me on this, because I think that the idea that you can get benefits from nature, and when you go there, you can go with other people, you react with other people, you can do it. Bird watching, you were a big bird watcher. So I mean, like, that kind of social participation is the thing that you want.
Yep, perfect. Karen, do you want to jump in, then we'll go to the audience?
Yeah, I think what we've learned in community settings around social participation is there's sort of, I think, two key things, and they're hard fought. They're not easy solutions. I think the first one is you're talking fundamentally about behavior change. And I don't change my behavior easily. I don't know about you guys trying to do your New Year's resolutions. I don't know why we think that seniors are suddenly going to fundamentally change their behavior, and it's not going to be difficult, right? I mean, you're adding in issues around perceptions of safety and physical well-being and mental health issues and cognitive impairments. And I mean, there's so many barriers, and then we're asking them to engage socially with people they've never met in an environment they've never been to, and maybe potentially participate in a exercise class in their 70s for the first time. Like, these are big asks. And so I think we need to support people to change their behavior in a way that's functional. So Satya talked about social prescribing. We're seeing some real success there. And I think why we see success with social prescribing, if you haven't heard of social prescribing, we have a link worker who receives a prescription from usually a primary care provider, sometimes a home care case manager, where the older adult gets to decide what their goals are in terms of their overall well-being and maybe their social connections. And then the link worker works with that person for usually 6 to 8 appointments to achieve those goals. And it might mean taking transit for the first time, going to a senior center for the first time, maybe leaving their apartment building and going for a walk around their block for the first time in a couple of years. Like, these might be perceived as small changes in behavior, but big changes. But having someone walk with you to achieve those goals, and especially if you don't have a family caregiver, which a lot of older adults don't, having that person with you is a big, important predictor of success. The second thing is, and you guys highlight this in the report, is the importance of these programs being led by seniors for seniors. The programs have to be designed based on what people want. And I think sometimes organizations and municipalities, we come in and we think we know what's best. We think that you need this, and we're going to design a fitness class, or we're going to design a pottery class, and people are going to show up. And I'll tell you, they don't come. My favorite example of an asset-based community development approach to programming that's been really effective is Men's Sheds. If you haven't checked out Men's Sheds Canada, they have a beautiful video online. It will make you cry. Watch it in private. I'm not kidding. Men's mental health, though, older men are the highest risk for some really terrible outcomes, suicide in particular. And the reason Men's Sheds work is because men decide what that shed is going to be for that community and for those men. And it works because it's being led by men for men. And so just generally speaking, when we're talking about how to get people involved, the people that need to be involved need to be the ones designing what that social engagement will look like for that community. And community can be very micro. It could just be a group of 6 people meeting in the lobby of a condo building, right, for coffee. That's a social community. So it doesn't have to be anything big and fancy. So those are the 2 things.
Awesome, Karen. Thank you.
Yeah.
Some of these audience questions have been here for a while. This is a big one from Shabeen Hanifa. How do we help Canadians shift away from viewing longevity simply as more years to focusing on improved quality of life and independence across those years? It's the not adding years to life, but life to those years question. And maybe I'll just quickly add to that. We keep seeing this stat, Talia referred to it. Canada's about to become a super age society where more than 20% of the population is 65 plus. So how do we turn that super age status into a superpower to build off that question? So who wants to take that first? I know Satya has thoughts, but David?
Maybe I'll just start with, to challenge the preface of the question, do we know that Canadians actually think that way? I'm not convinced. I do think people are aware that more isn't always better, and I want better, not necessarily more. And so I do think there's a wide, I think, already understanding. I look at it also to keep in mind that many of the older adults that we surveyed are also caregivers. So like my grandmother is 98 and is fully into dementia. My mother fully understands that her living to 98 probably wasn't good because she's been basically not my grandmother for 5 years, right? And so I do think that is not well understood, but is maybe more developed than simply longer is better. Now, how to live that, I think, is where the work comes in.
You're getting to expanding that health span later
Exactly.
into those years.
Exactly.
Financial security, all the things that we've heard mentioned a few times today. Karen or Satya?
That's a really complex question. I think there are some policy levers that have been highlighted in the report that are going to support people to have quality of life during those years. It comes back to the issue, I think, around behavioral change, which is a tough one. We talk about how different generations are going to prioritize different things. My parents are boomers. My mom's also in the hospital right now. It's a tough one in terms of people making behavioral changes in order to have that quality of life later in their years. I think one of the things right now, I think our healthcare systems are very, very overwhelmed, and we are focusing our financial investments often in a very reactionary way, rightfully so, because there are crises in acute care and long-term care, primary care. But at some point, we are going to need to invest in prevention. And I think Canadians maybe are not as educated as they need to be around what healthy aging needs to look like. And in order for us to make those behavioral changes, in order to have quality years, people need to know what decisions we need to make to be able to have quality in our years. So that requires some pretty significant investments in terms of moving towards prevention. It's a tough ask, right, when our healthcare system is pretty stretched at the moment, but making those investments, I think, into preventative care would be a priority.
Awesome. Okay. Tell us about the longevity dividend, Satya.
This is going to take at least 2 minutes or
2 minutes.
or 3 minutes or something.
Okay, by the way, we have 6 minutes left up here in total. So
I need you to work with me because I don't have the graphics to go with this. You all know what a dividend is, right? You only get the dividend if you're smart about it, you make the right decisions, and it's not forever if you miss the boat. Yeah, you got that. Okay, now I want you to have 2 images that we're going to work with. One is the equilateral triangle, if you remember your geometry, and we're going to distort it, and you'll work with me to distort it. The second is a python that has just eaten a chicken, and right behind its head is this big bulge. And this bulge is moving through the snake, and as it gets digested, there's no more bulge. You got that? You got these 2 images? Okay. So what's happening with the triangle? That's the population triangle. You know that it's by age, and it goes up that way. So when we had a lot of children, that base was very big. And then it tapered off, and then we had this little point where we didn't have very many older people. It was a rarity. We don't have an understanding of what longevity is.
Right.
So, I mean, we had this little thing there. Now what happens is that we don't make any babies, or not any, but fewer. So that base is narrow. If that base is narrow, that means you can't have a lot of people up there either. So it's becoming like a little more like this rather than like this. And then at the top, we have a lot of older people. So then the older people, the triangle got taller. And the top part of it got more like a spire than like a triangle. You all with me? Yeah, so then the spire is the thing that takes you all the way up to 100 years, like. Okay. Now, when this happened, now in Canada, we have more older people than we have children. And so the thinking has changed in two ways. One is that these older people, they're not behaving like they're supposed to when in the 60s. I mean, they are graduating from university later, they're investing in things, they're going on cruises, they're marrying later. I mean, the life event, the whole life course is not managed in the way it was before. The next thing is, and I'm glad you brought this up, David, is that we measured the economy in a funny, stupid kind of a way. We thought it was only related to the labor market. There are many other ways in which we create value. And this value can be economic or social. And the older people are creating this value by investing. You know, in Japan, 1/3 of the startups is by older people. Why? Because they have knowledge, they have experience. I mean, there's different ways in which we can create value. So this thing is happening with the older people in that spire, okay? And so that kind of contribution that these older people do, it depends whether you let them do it, whether you encourage them to do it. You appreciate that they are doing it. You measure the thing. You show the value to other people, okay? Now we come to our python with the chicken. And so what we had was the baby boomers. So the baby boomers, instead of nice smooth line like this, the baby boomers made a bump. And the bump started lower, and when it was at the lower end, we started free education for children. We started different ways in which we could help children. Then when it moved up, you know, we started the college and university system. Then we got, you know, a little higher, and then we had things to do with the labor market when they went to work and so on. Now where's this bump? It's sort of between 65 and 75, that bump. What happens to this bump? This bump disappears, right? So how is this bump working? Well, you said we're going to be a super age society this year. You know what? That's 1 in 5. 2031, it's going to be 1 in 4. Mm-hmm. Japan is 1 in 3. The difference is Japan had decades to get used to this. For us, from now to 31 is not decades. We got to hurry up if we're going to do anything to benefit from all of this. So the way in which we value the bump before it disappears, it's like you had a big storm and you got the military to come and help. You got this boost. They came in there, they cleaned up everything, and they left. That's what we have to do with this little bump that's going to move off. So if we don't hurry up, no dividend. We won't benefit from the dividend. So the idea is that You know the orange shirt movement? Every child counts. We need to think that every older person counts. They have contributed before they retired, after they retired, and we need to be able to use their skills, their thinking, the way in which they feel that we have a shared destiny, the older people as well as the younger people.
A perfect finish to this panel. Thank you so much, Satya. And I cannot recommend Dr. Brink's book enough. Just to close the panel, I want to thank Satya, David, and Karen for joining us. Thank you for everyone who was joining us online and in person today. I want to quickly, before I invite Fraser up here, thank the NIA team, Jen and Zine and Talia and Magdalene, Rory and Joanne and Susie Wilcox, who worked so well with Manulife to pull this off and this wonderful relationship. Thank you all. We will be trying to answer some of the questions that we didn't get to offline. There is a nice reception after this, so we can stick around, and the NIA team is always available. So with that, I'll turn it over to Fraser Wiswell, the head of Global Participant Outcomes, Manulife Wealth and Asset Management, for closing remarks. Thanks, Fraser.
What a fabulous visual to close off the session with today. Thank you, Satya. Really appreciate that. I think it really is this big lump moving through our population, and it's a great opportunity to try and find solutions. So once again, let's thank our excellent panel, Satya, David, and Karen. As we wrap up today, I just want to acknowledge what an important conversation this really is. The insights remind us that aging isn't just a demographic trend. Aging is a human experience that impacts us all. And it impacts our communities, and it impacts our entire system. And so while we're hearing some concerning things, there's certainly some alarm being raised with the insights we heard today. We know that Canadians want to retire and age with confidence, and that this should be seen as an opportunity. We should be optimistic about this for the future. Over time, longevity should result in more time, more connection, and more possibility for our older Canadians. But that only happens if people feel healthy and financially secure. And so that's where we all have a meaningful role to play. Everyone in this room, policymakers, researchers, is to help address this challenge. At Manulife, we're committed to making decisions easier and lives better and helping people plan for the future across our entire organization. It's really important work as lifespans continue to grow, because living longer is only a positive thing, and we talked about this earlier, if we can close the gap between lifespan, health span, and wealth span. And through our partnership with the Manulife Longevity Institute, we're combining our expertise with that of partners like the NIA to help research these challenges and look for solutions together. So I want to thank the NIA for their leadership, for leaning in, their partnership with us, and all the insights you've brought forward today. Thank you for your commitment to improving how Canadians age. So as was mentioned, to everyone in the room and online, thank you for joining today. For those in the room, we will have a reception outside where hopefully we can all network, connect, and continue this important conversation. Thank you and have a great afternoon.